Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, to this professional lunch. I'm Anthony Rowley, First Vice President, and it's my pleasure to act today as moderator and to introduce our two guest speakers. To my immediate right is Eoin Murphy. I think I've got the pronunciation right, who is Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government in the Republic of Ireland. And to his right is Anne Barrington, who is the current Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ireland in Japan. A warm welcome to both of you. Well, as you all know, tomorrow is the 17th of March, and that means it's also St. Patrick's Day. Well, we're not here today to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but there'll be plenty of celebrations tomorrow with parades and festivals and what have you here in Tokyo. So there'll be plenty of time to have fun on St. Patrick's Day. We're here today to discuss a rather more sober subject, the impact that Brexit is likely to have on Ireland. And Japan has a very strong stake in this issue because, to quote the Irish Times, Japan sees Ireland as an important ally in as it seeks to safeguard the interests of Japanese companies in the UK and in the European Union following Brexit. There is a very heavy Japanese business presence in Ireland, of course. So let me get to the speakers. Minister Murphy will give an address first. Ambassador Barrington will not actually give an address, but she'll be available to answer questions and answers after the Minister has spoken. Minister Murphy was appointed to his present position in 2017, prior to which he served as Minister of State at the Department of Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform, with special responsibilities for financial services, government and public procurement. Ambassador Barrington was appointed as Ireland's ambassador to Japan in, if I can just find my piece of paper, in September 2014. Prior to that, she served, among other positions, as Director General of the Europe Division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Dublin. She's also a former ambassador to Tanzania, to Kenya and to Burundi, and she's occupied various diplomatic posts in Washington and at the United Nations in New York. All right, I'm going to keep my introduction brief. Let me ask you all, please, as usual, to switch your mobile phones off or put them on manner mode as a courtesy to our guests. So please join me in welcoming our guests.
Well, thank you, Anthony, and thank you all very much for coming to this press briefing. I'm going to stay seated if that's okay. I hope you all can see me as I take you through the presentation that I'm going to give. If I might just say, it's a real honour to be speaking in the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, one of Japan's most prestigious press clubs. And may I wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Day ahead of the weekend that's before us. And just one other thing to say is I'm wearing two pins on my lapel, if you can't see them. One is obviously the flag of Japan and the flag of Ireland. The other is for the Rugby World Cup next year, of which we're very excited about at home in Ireland. We're actually playing Japan in one of the first matches of the tournament, and we're very excited about all of the Irish people who are going to be visiting Japan next year for that fantastic tournament. My briefing focuses mainly on the issue of Brexit and what that means for Ireland, but also what it means for Japan and what it means for the European Union. And when earlier in the year we were looking at the title of this briefing, I think we thought that we would be significantly further down the road in the negotiations. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of uncertainty about what it is that the UK is looking for and what it is looking to achieve in the negotiations. But nonetheless, let me focus on the European and Irish economies first before addressing the issues specifically surrounding Brexit. It's very encouraging that the European economy is now growing faster than the US economy, with larger than expected growth last year of 2.4% and robust predictions for this year of 2.3% and next year of 2%. This is a result of both stronger cyclical momentum in Europe, where labour markets continue to improve and economic sentiment is particularly high, and a stronger than expected pickup in global economic activity and trade. We're also very heartened by the agreement in December between the European Union and Japan on the Economic Partnership Agreement. We believe that this framework will allow the European Union and Japan to do more trade with each other, which will benefit all of our people. The agreement also sends a strong signal that the European Union and Japan share the same values and will work to protect a rules-bound, free and fair trading system, which is the basis not only for prosperity, but also for peace. At a national level, Ireland's economic recovery is now firmly established. The increase in economic activity is broad-based and built on a solid foundation. Export growth in recent years has been strong, and exports continue to contribute positively to the economy. The domestic economy is now also driving growth, and real GDP growth is forecast at 3.5% in 2018 and 3.2% in 2019. The forecasts reflect growth in exports and in domestic demand. Unemployment has also fallen steadily from a peak of 16% in early 2012 to just 6.1% in January of 2018. Later this year, we imagine that we will reach technically full employment in the economy. And this will be a very important occasion for the country, given the increase in unemployment that we had after the financial crisis of 2008. Ireland has made steady progress towards placing our public finances on sustainable footing. The general government deficit is now estimated to have fallen to 0.3% for 2017 and is expected to remain at 0.3% this year. Our debt to GDP ratio is also on a firm downward trajectory. Having peaked at just under 120% of GDP in 2012, it is projected to reach 70.1% of GDP in 2017. The market reaction to our management of our public finances is clear, with the cost of borrowing close to historic lows, reflecting our continued economic and fiscal improvements. And our budget for 2018 for this year focuses on safeguarding the national finances, promoting fairness and providing for sustained improvements in people's lives and making sensible and long-term investments to benefit us now and into the future. The budget will deliver the objective of balancing the books in structural terms by achieving Ireland's medium-term budgetary objective, or MTO, under the EU rules. When it comes to Brexit, EU membership remains central to the success of Ireland's open, competitive economy and has been the foundation for much of the economic and social progress that we have made over the last 4 decades. We are confident that our economy is resilient and that the European Union economies, as I have said, have shown great strength during the past year. In addition to concerns we share with our EU partners and Japan about the economic impact of Brexit, we have very specific issues in Ireland, not least related to our peace process. We are pleased that Ireland's positions are fully reflected in the negotiations. Our priorities are clear: protect the peace process, no hard border, retention of the common travel area and reciprocal rights, the closest possible trading relationship with the UK, and work for the future of our European Union. And we are working towards an agreement on transitional arrangements that will minimise disruption for business and people and provide as much certainty as possible, leading up to a future relationship agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Ireland is passionate about the future of the European Union, and we look forward to playing our part in determining that future. The door always remains open to the United Kingdom. We don't want them to leave the European Union, the single market or the customs union, but ultimately this is a decision for them. We intend to maintain our strong relationship with both the European Union and with the United Kingdom. And we have already taken important steps to prepare our economy, including significant measures announced in Budget 2018, the Action Plan for Jobs, and our trade and investment strategy. And membership of the single market and customs union is a core element of our economic strategy, including in attracting businesses and business both over the decades and more recently. In 2017, our goods exports to the rest of the European Union were over 3 times what we exported to the United Kingdom. Avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland and the protection of the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement and the gains of the peace process is an absolute priority for the Irish government, as is ensuring the integrity of the single market and Ireland's place in that single market. The EU and the UK share the objective of protecting the gains of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, and the objective of avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. It is the government's view that the UK effectively staying in the customs union and single market, or as close as possible to that, would be the best solution to avoid a hard border on the island. And this is more about goods crossing the border. It's about people's lives and their livelihoods and the abilities of communities and businesses in the border region to develop and prosper together. There will need to be a political solution, and not just a legal or a technical one, as this represents a unique and unprecedented set of circumstances for all involved. And the potential impacts are profound, with specific sectors such as agri-food particularly challenged. This requires a hard-headed, radical and innovative response. Having said that, it is clear that the European Union will not be defined by one member leaving it. We have shown remarkable unity and solidarity to this point, and though the going may get tougher, there is no reason to suggest that the unity will not prevail. The future of the European Union is incredibly bright. And may I say, the government greatly appreciates the continued strong investment by almost 80 Japanese companies in Ireland. They are some of our most respected overseas investors and employers. And there are many key reasons for companies selecting Ireland. We share the same values. We have the youngest population in the EU, with 50% of our people under the age of 35, and our education system ranks in the top 10 in the world. We speak English and we use the common law system. The World Competitiveness Yearbook ranks Ireland first in the world for the flexibility and adaptability of its workforce. We have a corporate tax rate of 12.5%, which we will maintain. Our Knowledge Development Box is the world's first such tax measure to comply with the OECD's new standards. It applies a corporate tax rate of 6.25%. We also have a 25% tax credit and a 15% grant for companies engaging in research, development and innovation. A significant number of financial companies have already selected Ireland as part of their post-Brexit solution. In banking, they include names like Barclays, the Bank of America Merrill Lynch. In asset management, names like Legal & General, Aberdeen Standard Investments, and in insurance, names such as Chaucer, Royal London, and many, many others. They cover both front and mid-office activities, looking at risk, compliance, anti-money laundering, information technology, and many more functions. We're also starting to see non-financial services companies select Ireland also. Almac and Wasdell, which are a UK-based pharmaceuticals company, have purchased land and premises in Ireland and will make it their release, testing and packaging hub, and also their EU distribution hub. And we are having conversations with many companies regarding Ireland as part of their post-Brexit solution. At this point, I will leave it at that in terms of my presentation on Ireland, our relations with Japan, and of course the situation involving Brexit and what that means for both Ireland and the European Union as well as Japan. And I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll open the floor to questions. First, the working press, and if there's time afterwards, then we'll open the floor to questions in general. Let me just ask you a quick question, if I may myself first. I think it was Donald Tusk who said recently that from the point of view of the European Commission or the European authorities, a question of Ireland first. I think that was the term he used in negotiations. In other words, Ireland's interests would in no way be sacrificed in the negotiations between between the European Union and Britain. Do you think that is reliable? Or do you think perhaps that Ireland's interests could somehow be compromised?
Thank you for that question, Andy. Do you mind if I take off my jacket? It's quite warm here under the lights. Thank you. I mean, it's a very good question. I think one of the things that is important to point out is that because we were aware of the potential risks that Brexit would pose to Ireland and the European Union, once we were informed that a referendum was going to take place, we began our preparations for Brexit. So a good year and a half in advance of the referendum. So we started scenario planning. We started talking to different sectors in the economy to get a better idea of how this might impact upon us. But we also started talking to our partners in the European Union to make them well aware of the difficulties of a Brexit result and the difficulties that would pose for Northern Ireland and for our communities, both sides of the border and in the border region. And as a result, when the Brexit decision was taken, we then came to a common position with our European Union partners, one position for the Union in the negotiations when it came to those Ireland-specific issues. So when Mr. Tusk says Ireland first, he's really saying Europe first. We are one in these negotiations. And it's very important that the UK understands this, and they do understand this. Of course, we have a close relationship with the UK. And of course, under the Good Friday Agreement, we have responsibility in Northern Ireland together. And both sides, the European Union and the United Kingdom, recognise that the Good Friday Agreement and the benefits of the Good Friday Agreement must be protected in this withdrawal process. And that's what we're working to achieve at the moment. And we have every faith in our European partners, in the negotiating team being led by Mr. Barnier, in the work that they will do to protect Europe's interests in these negotiations. Ireland's interests are Europe's interests, and Europe's interests are Ireland's interests.
Okay, questions from the floor. Do we have a question? Peter, yes. This one? Yes, it is.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and also happy St. Pat's Day to you.
Thank you.
We hear this term, hard Brexit, has sort of entered the vernacular. And now we're hearing about hard borders, and one assumes then there might be, a soft border, I don't know, a deep fried border. I don't know where you take it. But what does it actually mean? Can you give us any, to use the same term, hard examples of, say, the worst case scenario that the Irish government is looking at from the point of view of economy and also from the point of view of the peace agreement, and what you see as why this so concerns you, and conversely to that, what is perhaps the best outcome that you can see for the border and the political and the business side of the picture. Thank you.
Thank you. What paper are you with? Sorry.
Freelance.
Freelance. Great. Thank you.
Fired recently.
Oh, sorry to hear that. That's tough times for the press at the moment. Thank you for those questions. So when the decision was taken, people started talking about this idea, the concept of a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. And obviously the hard Brexit being, I suppose one might interpret it as a complete withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, from the single market, from the customs union, from every other agreement that there might be that is tied into European Union. And a softer Brexit would be a version that was the UK remaining in some parts of the Union, depending on what could be agreed in the negotiations that were to come. But I think another concern then kind of came front and centre in the immediate months after the Brexit decision, and that was the question of an orderly Brexit versus a disorderly Brexit. And we in the Irish government, one of the key things that we were pushing, of course, from the very first day was the importance of the peace agreement and maintaining peace in Northern Ireland. But another thing that we were pushing as well, as a matter of importance for the negotiations, was orderly and transparent negotiations. So we spoke very early on about the need for a transitional arrangement once an agreement was reached to allow both sides, the European Union and the United Kingdom, to manage the withdrawal process in an orderly fashion. That's important for businesses, but it's also important for people. And we wanted to make sure that there would be sufficient time once the conclusion of the Article 50 process had come to an end in March of next year, that there would then be a period that we could make the necessary changes that would need to be made so that we'd have a stable process in place. And it's good to see now that we have a proposal for a transitional period up until the end of December 2020 to allow whatever changes need to happen to take place. And obviously in terms of transparency, because there are a number of negotiating partners within the European Union in terms of the Commission and the Council and the Parliament, that's ensured full transparency over the negotiations and exactly what is being discussed by the negotiating teams at each stage of the process, which I think is a welcome development. In the past, you might not have seen that kind of transparency in international relations, and I think it's very important that we have it. It's important for the people of the European Union, but it's equally important for the people of the United Kingdom as well, that they understand exactly what's happening in these negotiations that are being conducted by their leaders. And then that takes us to the question that you asked about a hard border versus a soft border. Well, the Taoiseach of Ireland has been quite clear, our Prime Minister, there will be no return to a border in Ireland. And the reason that we place such importance on that is that for decades we had significant and very disturbing violence in Northern Ireland between two communities that are so similar in many respects, but had very serious difficulties in the north. And a lot of work was put into getting to an eventual point where we had the Good Friday Agreement, and we had a pathway for peace, and we had a pathway for an assembly, and we had administration and being led in Northern Ireland by the parties and the elected representatives there. And a big part of that was the coming down of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And what that has meant now for people who can move freely up and down every day between the two. It is one island, but it is politically two countries, and they can move freely, no problem between the two areas. And business can move freely. A lot of business actually in certain sectors, be it in relation to agriculture, for example, would depend on both economies. So it's one economy together, in fact, that they're working to. So any imposition of a border, a physical border, or any type of border, in my opinion, on the island of Ireland, would be a retrograde step in terms of those very hard-won achievements in relation to peace and also the economy and prosperity on the island of Ireland. And while we believe that the issue of Northern Ireland is settled in a way that we don't believe that there will be a return to violence, we cannot risk it. We have to make sure that all of the work that was done continues to be done and continues to advance the cause of peace and the cause of prosperity, because we can have difficulties from time to time. And we have to be vigilant in maintaining peace and maintaining cooperation and good relations. And so it's very important to us that there be no border on the island of Ireland. We have made that clear. The European Union supports that position, and the United Kingdom supports that position. So now we come to the crux of things in terms of how do we square that position that both sides share with the recent statement from Prime Minister May that the UK will withdraw from the customs union and from the single market. How do we achieve that? How do we reconcile what seem to be two competing logics? And that is the piece of work that we are embarking upon now in the next 6 months to 12 months, trying to resolve that situation. What I hope it will mean in terms of outcomes is a very close relationship between the UK and the European Union at the end of this process. We don't yet know what the future relationship agreement will be. It may very well be something that doesn't yet exist in terms of the European Union's relationships with other countries or other partnerships at the moment, something that will have to be constructed. I've said before that one of the positive things here, and we should always look for the positives, is all of these things are political constructs. They're social constructs, which means they can be reconstructed, they can be reimagined, and they can be built if the political will is there to build them. And I believe it is on both sides. We are now coming from the first phase of negotiations into the second phase, where we'll look to that future agreement. And knowing what we know about our commitments to not having a border return on the island of Ireland, that will now guide us in the second phase as to what the future agreement might look like.
Perhaps I could just ask you one more quick question myself, also addressed to Ambassador Barrington. I think, putting it rather crudely, when Brexit was first announced, many people thought, well, Ireland will still be part of the European Union, so Japanese companies are obviously going to migrate to Ireland. And we thought, perhaps those of us who didn't think it through properly, the motor manufacturing industry was one obvious case, that the Nissans and the Toyotas of this world would set up shop in Ireland and use that as their base. Likewise, I think a lot of people thought that many financial companies would migrate from the City of London to Ireland. Well, what is the reality? I mean, which particular industries from Japan in particular are actually likely to migrate to Ireland, do you think?
Yeah. Well, certainly in terms of heavy manufacturing and car industry, that's not something that Ireland is seeking because we don't have a car manufacturing facilities in Ireland. But we would hope that financial services companies, insurance companies, general companies would consider Ireland as and consider the offering that we have if they are concerned about the possibility that the UK will not be part of the customs union and the single market. We would hope that they would consider Ireland as a possible solution to their Brexit problem. But we remain open. We have very good facilities in Ireland. We've seen many US companies, financial services companies, taking the decision to move part of their operation from London and put it in Dublin. And we're in conversations with a variety of other Japanese companies and other companies from around the world. And they are looking at options, whether it's Frankfurt or Dublin or Amsterdam or whatever. But we are very much open for business, and we will remain the only common law country after Brexit has happened. We'll be the only English-speaking country. So we have many of the assets and benefits that companies have when they're in London. They also are there in Dublin. And we have a very good business environment. The Japanese companies that are operating already in Ireland, many of them are expanding their business there. so that when they have come and set up in Ireland, they find it's a very good place to do business, and we've seen a growth in these companies over the last 5-10 years. So it's a very good operating environment for them.
So do you have any comments to add?
Just one comment to add to what the ambassador said, and she's I think she stressed the key point in the question. But I used to have responsibility for financial services, and one of the immediate concerns that came up was from the financial services sector and how it could continue to operate out of London into the European market without having what are known as passporting rights. It's their ability to trade financial services across borders. And this is, again, one of the reasons why we talked about the importance of a transition period, to avoid a cliff edge effect, whereby at a certain point in time on midnight, on a date in March, all of a sudden business wouldn't be able to be conducted cross-border in financial services. And it's not something that's just of concern to companies that work in financial services, but any business that conducts trade over a border, has a financial transaction that happens across a border, is impacted potentially by this. So a huge amount of work has already happened in financial services, and because it takes longer for a financial services firm to relocate into another jurisdiction because of the different regulations that are in place, they started making decisions quite early. And so we have seen a number of financial firms either increase their presence in Ireland or start to move substance to Ireland. Other companies, though, are waiting a bit more to see what the future agreement might look like. But where we have a particular offering, which we think we can be of benefit to companies, be they in financial services or be they in technology, is around those new technology areas. Things like artificial intelligence, automation, reg tech, med tech, fintech. We're seeing a lot of interest in those areas in particular in Ireland as being a gateway for companies into the single market. We have a very successful track record of being the gateway for US companies into the single market of 450 million people. And the proposition that we've been saying to companies in Japan since Brexit is we can be your gateway into the single market. I think about 70% of Japanese investments into the single market are into the UK. If the UK withdraws from the European Union and withdraws from the customs union in the single market, it may well be that a lot of that investment will need to redirect to another location in Europe to continue to have that access. And our offering, as an English-speaking country, as a common law jurisdiction with an excellent workforce that's very well educated, that already does this in technology and financial services and pharmaceuticals for so many international players, is to say that we can do it for Japanese companies as well. And I'm very pleased to say that has been positively received here in Japan.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Presentation. Daniel Hurst. I'm a freelance journalist working for The Guardian at the moment. Minister, you mentioned in the speech, I'm paraphrasing roughly, but that you're not keen on, Ireland's not keen on the fact that the UK is withdrawing from the EU, but you understand it's their decision. From a technical perspective, do you think it's too late for them to stop Brexit? Mm-hmm. Is it technically still possible, even if it's not politically possible? Because there's been increasing talk from some EU officials, just at least canvassing that possibility in the last few weeks. And secondly, to the ambassador, you've obviously been speaking to Japanese companies here with sites in the UK. Can you explain a bit about the sorts of concerns that those Japanese companies are raising, a bit of a sense of what their worries are, and whether Ireland can actually provide that certainty when there's still it's still not clear exactly what the settlement will be? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Daniel. Democracies do funny things from time to time, and people might say that Brexit is one of those funny things that they weren't expecting that the people of the UK to vote for. Our point of view as the European Union is that the door is always open. I mean, we believe that the European Union is stronger with the United Kingdom in. We believe that the United Kingdom is stronger being in the European Union. But we absolutely respect their decision, their sovereign decision to withdraw, which they have now invoked under the Article 50 process, and which they are pursuing. If at a point in time in the future that they decided they wanted to review that, whether it be by a parliamentary decision or another referendum, that would absolutely be a decision of theirs, and the European Union would not stand in the way of that. And I think, speaking from my own point of view, it would be something that would be welcome. But right now, we work to what we have, which is a decision by the UK to leave the European Union. And our ambition is to make sure that that withdrawal leads to a future relationship that is as close as possible for the United Kingdom and the European Union, recognizing at the same time that if you're going to leave the Union, you can't have the same rights as people who remain in the Union. And so that's very important to us because we have really ambitious plans for the future of Europe. Ireland wants to play a leading role in where Europe now goes in terms of some of the key questions that it's going to be asking itself. I think it's going to be a very exciting time for the EU, even though we are very disappointed that the UK has made this decision. And we don't know, as the European Union changes in the future, how the UK might regard those changes, positively or negatively, and what that might mean for a future government of the UK, or a future vote that might happen in Parliament or in a referendum. So we remain open to it, obviously, but we work towards what we have at the moment, which is the Article 50 process.
And on the other question then, concerns of companies, I think the language that's used in companies is the word uncertainty comes up all the time. And then there's a request for both transparency and predictability. And these are the three words that I keep hearing when we're talking to companies. And as we said before, some of those companies in the financial services sector, for example, have made decisions, whereas other companies are waiting to see the outcome of the withdrawal agreement and the future relationship to see what it is, what decisions they have to take to react to. But obviously, the uncertainty is the big question mark for all these companies at the moment, because we just don't know what the outcome is going to be.
I think if I could add to that, Ambassador, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty in international affairs at the moment. And I keep on coming back to this quote from Voltaire, which you'll all know: doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. So we will never have true certainty over anything, really. But what we have tried to do, given all this uncertainty, is to latch on to key certainties that people can be sure of in these uncertain times. One of those certainties is the relationship between Ireland and Japan, and it's very much been enhanced by the agreement, the free trade agreement between the EU and Japan. There's a certainty there in terms of international trade and investment that will happen and will continue and will grow between the European Union and Japan and between Ireland and Japan. And so that's one certainty that we can find in these uncertain waters. And another certainty that we communicate as well is the certainty of our membership of the European Union. So I know that Japanese companies, I know the Japanese government were taken aback and upset by the decision of the UK to withdraw from the European Union. I don't think they had expected it. Many people hadn't. There will never be that kind of uncertainty in relation to Ireland's membership of the European Union, because we have always been committed members of the European Union, and popular support amongst our public is incredibly high. It's in the mid to high 80% support for the European Union, because we have used it to empower our democracy and empower our people. We've also used it to invest in our country. And while we can't be sure now exactly what Brexit will look like, we have just launched a capital investment plan for the next 10 years in our country of 116 billion euro in key infrastructure: transport, ports, roads, airports, schools, hospitals. We do that predicated on a growth rate, on an annual growth rate that's actually 2 percentage points lower than what we think the growth rate will be. So one of the ways that we've tried to design our future plans is on the assumption that Brexit will have a negative impact on our economy. But nevertheless, we will still be able to invest over 100 billion in that economy at the same time to allow it to continue to expand and grow. So these are the kind of things that we do to make sure that we can, without knowing exactly what the future holds, make sure that we are best protected from what might be a more negative decision in the end, depending on where the negotiations go.
Okay, floor is open to anyone for questions. Yes, gentleman here.
Thank you for coming, Minister and Ambassador. My name is Hiro Watanabe from Sankei Shimbun, Japanese newspaper. Let me ask 2 questions. Maybe in Japanese, it's better.
First, the The minister mentioned that there is a lot of uncertainty in the international politics right now, and one of the uncertainties is the recent protectionist tendency from the Trump government of the U.S. For example, the tariffs on the steel and aluminum, which may not have a direct relationship with the Ireland. However, you said that this free trade is very important and is driving your economy's growth. But what the possibilities of the triggering a trade war, which may be caused by these moves by the Trump administration, what impacts will that have on Ireland? And my next question is related to Brexit. In Ireland, you have been repeatedly emphasizing that there shouldn't be no hard border. And this probably, in general terms, the ultimate measures to assure that there is no border will be unification of Ireland. When it comes to the unification of Ireland, what are the opinions or the debates now being made within the country right now? Of course, it may come down the way beyond the immediate Brexit issue. But
thank you for your question, and thank you very much for coming to the reception yesterday evening. Yes, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Guinness. Good. I enjoyed it too. Yeah, they're really good questions. So this uncertainty that we see in international affairs at the moment in terms of the protectionism by some countries, I think is deeply worrying. We have so many challenges that we face as a globe, as a confederation of different states. Things like climate change, things like poverty, things like terrorism that can only be addressed if we work on them together, because they don't respect the traditional state borders that we would be used to since, I suppose, the Treaty of Westphalia. And to see certain leaders withdrawing from those obligations, I think makes the times only more challenging. And I'm talking here about climate change. We're going to make a huge investment over the next 10 years in climate change, climate mitigation measures, and in the environment. And we do that because we have obligations and responsibilities both within the European Union, but also in relation to the different international conventions that we've signed up to. And we believe in those obligations that we have to the international community. We are an internationalist country. We are like Japan. We seek to place ourselves as an island at the center of the world, even though we are a small island in relative terms to other countries and other islands. But so it does worry us when we see some countries retreating from some of those obligations. Our response then is to redouble our efforts for international cooperation. Our response is to seek a seat at the United Nations Security Council in 2021. Our response is to, as I said, invest more in climate change. Our response is to make sure that we are doing everything we can to increase trade between countries, because the history of trade between countries is that it is better for those countries and it lifts people out of poverty. Trade is a positive thing. And so whenever, and this comes back to Brexit as well, whenever you put in place any impediment to trade, be it customs controls, be it an additional tariff, it reduces trade and it makes trade more difficult, more expensive. And who suffers from that? The people in each country suffer from that. Because they're not getting the goods that they need, or they're not getting them at a price that is affordable to them. There's a whole range of impacts that flow from a breakdown in trade agreements between countries, or where trade becomes more restricted. And so while it's difficult to know what the precise implications of any particular withdrawal from a trade agreement might be, or any imposition of a new tariff might be, you can be almost 100% certain that there's going to be a negative impact on affairs more generally as a result of this. So we continue to be committed to the European Union, we continue to be committed to the United Nations, and we continue to be committed to all of those trade agreements that we have, and using those agreements to improve not just our own prosperity, but global prosperity. And where there is global prosperity, where people's standards of living are increasing, where there is greater education, we see greater health outcomes, we see less conflict, we see better protection of the environment, all these great things that flow from international cooperation. So, you know, that's why we would be concerned about some moves that have been made by some countries at the moment. In relation to the border issue and the unification of Ireland, so essentially at the moment we are an all-island economy in many areas already, and it's very difficult to distinguish in Ireland between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in terms of the economy. My own party, Fine Gael, which is the lead party in government, believes in a united Ireland. But there is, within the Good Friday Agreement, a protocol and a process by which anything like that might be achieved, and we are many, many years away from that. And that can only be done by a vote of the people in Northern Ireland, and only at a time when the Secretary to Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom government believes that it is time to hold such a vote. So all of these procedures are in place, and I think that's a long way down the line. And the importance for us in the Brexit negotiations in not having a border is for the reasons that I said around the peace process. And while it's difficult to see what that will mean in terms of the future trade agreement between the two entities, the United Kingdom and the European Union, what we have now agreed in the protocol and the withdrawal text with our partners in the EU is that at the very minimum, you know, if we can't come to a positive agreement in the future relationship, at a very minimum, there'll be no regulatory divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And that's a key backstop that we have as the negotiations unfold.
Ambassador, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's...
No. Can I just ask you a quick question? You emphasised the importance of common law, the fact that Ireland has common law. This is maybe a rather silly question, but how important is that? For example, when, let's say, Japanese companies invest, how important is the common law basis in making their investment in Ireland, for instance?
It's a good question, and it wouldn't have been something that I was alive to immediately as to the importance, and it's something that I actually heard when I was here in Japan in September of 2016, and beginning our first discussions with Japanese companies and the Japanese government as to the potential impacts of Brexit. Since then, there have been, I think, 8 ministerial visits to Japan from the Irish government, including the governor of our central bank. But from that initial visit, the importance of common law has been front and center, because it was raised by Japanese companies with me in terms of the ease at which they might relocate a headquarters or some substance or a subsidy out of the UK into the single market. You know, it's obviously much easier to do it if you can do it into the same legal jurisdiction, because it's much easier to adapt contracts and other legal forms that need to be done. And so one thing that we have seen actually is a massive increase in the number of English law firms registering in Ireland to do business in the common law system. We're also seeing, I mean, I'll get this statistic wrong, but I think it might be the 11th biggest law firm in Ireland is now an English law firm, because they have registered their solicitors in Ireland so that they can contract in common law for Japanese companies, for other companies that are moving their operations. And we're also starting to see business contracts now being written in Irish common law. That's feedback that we're getting from our own law society. So again, it makes it easier. And so when companies are weighing up the different decisions and they're doing their own cost-risk analysis, this is something that makes it easier, makes it cheaper, makes it quicker. So it is quite important.
Okay, next question, yes, please.
Thank you, Minister Ambassador, for your wonderful presentation. My name is Wada. I'm with Japan's Mainichi newspaper. My question is about the European Union's current situation. You mentioned the importance, or you stressed the unity of the European Union, but some of the members in the eastern part of the Union, like countries like Hungary or Poland, seems to be deviating from the core values of the Union, like the rules of law or, freedom of press. How worried are you about that kind of tendency? Do you think you can make those countries change their minds and conform to the core values of the Union? Thank you.
Thank you, Wada, for that question. It's always been challenging in the European Union to draw a pathway forward as to how we would all like to go as a union together. And one of the things that came out of the last referendum that we had in relation to European unity was a move away from unanimity, in decision making to qualified majority voting in certain instances. And this has allowed certain countries to bring particular issues to the fore, look for support, and then progress on them. And I think that's healthy actually for the union, because it's allowed us to do things that mightn't have been previously possible. What we saw in the financial crisis is a speed of integration or a pace of integration across our financial services and other areas that might have taken decades to achieve previously, but because there was a common cause and a common good, the European Union moved very quickly together as one. In other areas, it might be more tricky, and we're currently doing a piece of work in the Irish government as to how we want the future of the European Union to proceed. And we're going to take that piece of work to the Irish people so that they're not surprised if in 3 years down the line, after 3 years of negotiations in committee rooms, a proposal comes out to the Irish people that they weren't expecting. We want to get in front of that. So we're looking at a whole host of different areas as to how the union might grow together, how it might change. And we want to then communicate that to the public to get a sense from them as to where they think the European Union should go. So we're best informed as the negotiations in different areas progress. And there is a common value system to the European Union. There's obviously the common rules that we all share, and we work very hard together to make sure that we all, proceed together. And one of the recent challenges that we had around that, I think, was some of the scenes that we saw in Barcelona when there were there was a poll taken, and there were some kind of violent reactions in the streets, and we wanted to make sure that. And it was difficult, but to make sure that people were communicating the same message insofar as what the values, the democratic values of the European Union and European Union countries were and still are. And we're always doing that work between ourselves to make sure that we're all working to the same values and the same standards. And sometimes that can be more challenging than others, depending on what's happening in individual countries. And I think it's important that every country within the European Union has a healthy respect for each other, and we do, and that we recognize what is a sovereign competency or what is bound by EU rules and decision making, and that we apply those areas equally throughout the Union.
Okay, Ambassador. No. By the way, what happens to the Irish pound or the Irish punt after Brexit? I mean, is it going to move in one particular direction?
Well, we went to the euro.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, we're the euro. Yeah. There are still some punts around. They won't buy you a pint of Guinness, but they're still around.
Oh. Right, that just shows how behind I am. Okay, next question. Yes. Are you press? I'm sorry. You're press. You first.
Thank you very much. I'm NHK, Public Broadcasting. I'm Hiroko Matsuzaki. Thank you very much to come here. And I just question in Japanese.
From the viewpoint of the Japanese companies, the island can be one option after Brexit. And it's one option for Japanese companies to operate in Ireland. And you also mentioned that many Japanese companies are operating, and the land prices are also going up. And then you said that the best protection is there, but can you please elaborate on the best protection so that the Japanese companies can feel reassured?
Thank you for your question. So a lot of Japanese companies are looking to Ireland as their post-Brexit solution, and a lot of the questions that come up in the engagements that I'm having are around the types of things that Ireland as a government is doing to make sure that as companies move to Ireland, that they can continue to have a positive operating experience in the single market from Ireland. So probably about 3 years ago, a very significant expansion in office building began in our economy, because our economy was growing so fast and business was picking up and we were creating new jobs. So as we began to do our Brexit analysis, we did a piece of, as I said, preparatory work before Brexit to see how it might impact each sector of our economy. Once Brexit happened, we went back to that work. We went back to our stakeholder partners to review it and to update it. And one of the first things that we saw was that we had more than enough office space being developed or in the pipeline to accommodate any new business that would come post-Brexit, which was very important. Shortly after the Brexit decision was made, we launched what's called Rebuilding Ireland, which is a very ambitious investment in building public housing in Ireland, but also making sure that we could unlock some of those regulatory levers to make sure that there was more private house building as well. And that program is a 5-year program. We're about 18 months into it, and it's already ahead of almost all of its targets. So there's been a significant increase in building over the last 18 months in terms of homes. And then earlier this year, we did 2 things. One was this investment of €116 billion over the next 10 years in very important things like transport infrastructure up and down the country, so that we could expand the economy. But again, that's going to have very positive impact on any post-Brexit relocations. But another thing that we have done is we have decided to establish a land management agency. So I met while I was in Japan with your urban regeneration agency, and it's a very good meeting for me to have to see exactly how Japanese companies and the Japanese government and local government are regenerating key parts of their city. And with this land management agency, we're going to look at old sites, vacant sites, semi-state sites, and we're going to try and redevelop parts of the city that currently the land isn't being used in the most efficient way. And we're going to redevelop that land for homes, but also for business and for commercial and retail and for cultural and sporting activities to really enhance the offering that we have in our major cities and also our largest towns. So those types of investment and that type of forward planning is the best protection that we can give for the Irish economy, but also for any companies that are coming to operate into that economy. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, thank you very much for the presentation today. My name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member. I was involved for 4 years at the time of the scoping exercise and then the initial negotiations for the EPA between Japan and the EU. About 10 days ago, there was a Brexit seminar at Temple University, and there was a growing opinion, apparently in the UK, for support for a second referendum. All the more as more and more information, or let's say the information which was given out at the time of the first referendum, the present situation, and there were several studies made in all directions for different scenarios. They all show that it is pretty much negative for the UK. In the best case, -1%, but in the worst scenarios, above 10%. And that would be a real disaster for the UK. So also there is no real organized support now for the second referendum. The idea of going for it is getting stronger and stronger, and of course you partially already you replied to the question. It's up to the UK to do it, but what is the information which is in your hands as far as the feelings or the situation in the UK at present? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question, and having had that involvement that you had in the agreement, you must be very happy with recent developments in December and how things are going. And so well done. Obviously, we're watching everything that's happening in the UK at the moment, and we're reading everything, and we're listening to everything. And we meet with ministers, and we meet with political parties, and we meet again ourselves as a government and as politicians, and we discuss what we've heard and what we've learned. But things have changed. Things are moving more quickly now, it seems, than they did previously. We were surprised when the UK government decided to call an election last year. We were surprised by the outcome. So it's not certain where things are going. But ultimately, any question, as I said earlier, over a second referendum is a matter for the English people. As to information, we think it's quite possible to quantify the negative impact of Brexit. It's not quite possible to quantify what the positive impact might be for the UK. I know that people tried to do it in the referendum, but many of those claims that were made at the time about the positives of Brexit have since been shown to be false, not true, even by the people who are promoting those same arguments. They very quickly after the referendum stepped back from them. So we continue to see different reports and studies coming out of the UK, but also out of the European Union as to the potential negative impacts of Brexit. And we haven't really seen any serious work on what the positive effects might be, and that, I think, answers its own question. We've also seen a change in language and tone from some ministers as to how they describe what Brexit will mean for the United Kingdom, which I think is interesting as well.
So we could see many of the Remainers migrating to Ireland, presumably. Question there, gentleman there. Sorry, did you raise your hand? No. Any more questions? Okay, Peter.
I was interested to hear you previously had a portfolio in financial services. The US recently has started very quietly, it seems, started rolling back a lot of the reforms. There were regulatory restrictions on Wall Street, which is raising a lot of concerns about another financial crisis down the road. Ireland was very, very badly hit by that, as were many other countries, particularly in housing, of course. Is there anything that you guys are looking at in terms of, I don't know, economies being so integrated these days that you can protect yourself from another crisis like that? Anything you're looking at in terms of, you know, oh, there's another bubble in housing coming, what would you do? And if I could quickly ask the daft question of the day, US presidents have a long tradition of claiming Irish heritage, you know, going back to Kennedy and, of course, Reagan and then Clinton and what have you. I haven't read anything about Trump, but would Dublin be coming out with any statement, if so, to say it's not our fault? Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, for that question. I'll do my best to answer it. So the financial services portfolio I haven't had since June of last year, but when I did have the portfolio, one of the things that we were concerned about was obviously the level of integration between financial services firms. I mean, it's almost a separate area of trade and business to everything else because it's almost a foundation stone for everything else. If you're selling goods, you know, across borders and all the different arrangements that you'd have to have in place. And we moved, as I said earlier, we moved very quickly to harmonise key parts of our regulatory structures in the European Union after the financial crisis to put better protections in place for all of us. Things like the single supervisory mechanism, things like banking union. We're trying to progress on capital markets union. These are all very important things that we need to do in the European Union to protect ourselves from future shocks. One of the difficulties, though, that you will always have post-crisis is you will reform, you will rebuild to protect your economy from the crisis that just happened. You're not necessarily protecting it from the crisis to come because you may not know what that looks like yet. So we always have to remain vigilant to that. And I know that in the US, the argument that they've been having in recent years is that after the reforms they made following their financial crisis, that the pendulum swung too far in the other way. And there are different ways of approaching regulation. One is a rules-based and the other is a principles-based. And, you know, the difficulty with a principles-based form of regulation is that it can be open to too wide an interpretation. The difficulty with a rules-based interpretation is that, you know, loopholes can be found and rules can be kind of played off against each other. So one of the things that I think we would like to ensure, but I also, you know, I think it's almost a necessity, is that there is a common structure for financial services internationally, and that we don't have some sort of regulatory race to the bottom between any part of the world when it comes to regulation. I don't see that happening at the moment. I think a lot of people are quite happy with the reforms that were made in the US post the crisis. That doesn't mean that there's sometimes scope for change or improvement. So I wouldn't be worried about that kind of race at the moment, even though I know some quarters have talked about it. In relation to potential new bubbles. I mean, one of the things that we did in Ireland in particular, because we did have previously a bubble in housing, were very important reforms in relation to lending criteria by the central bank for mortgages. And those restrictions still remain in place, and they should prevent any kind of a credit bubble forming in housing. But you can see, and maybe we are seeing, inflationary risks when it comes to the price of land. This is one of the reasons why the government made the decision to set up this new land regeneration and development agency, to make sure that we had a direct involvement in the land market, so that we could put that land to its best possible use, strategic land. And one of those best possible uses that we see is affordable housing. So we are now getting involved to temper that market, to provide housing at an affordable cost, to buy or to rent, for people who want to live and work in their cities and live near where they work. Be they a school teacher or someone working in a hospital or a member of the emergency response services. So that's the kind of work that we're doing at the moment in that regard. And in relation to President Trump, our Prime Minister has just finished his official engagement with President Trump over the last number of days. Obviously, it's St. Patrick's Week, and every year, our Prime Minister will go and have a special audience with the President of America. And I haven't seen the latest news, but I do understand that he has invited President Trump to Ireland, and he'd be more than welcome. We have a very strong relationship between our two countries. We kind of believe that we helped build America, Irish immigration, over the years. I think I saw a stat somewhere about the number of people who signed the Declaration of Independence claiming direct Irish heritage. There are probably somewhere between 30 and 40 million Americans today who claim Irish ancestry. And there's a number of, I think there's about 100,000 jobs in the US that are created by Irish companies. And when you look back, you see the huge investment by American companies in Ireland. American tourism is fantastic, but also America played a very real and meaningful role in our peace process. And we will always be grateful for that. So we will always maintain a very strong relationship between the two countries.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. Thank you both for very obviously well-informed and impressive performances. Mr. Murphy, you have not spoken here before, but we'd like you to come back again soon, and to encourage you, we'd like to offer you a one-year honorary membership of the club. And Ambassador Barrington, you have, incidentally, I'm sure you all know that Ambassador Barrington is finishing her term next month, sadly, but please do come back whenever you have the opportunity. And let me give you, this is from... This is a FCCJ T-shirt. Sorry, the size is too big. Thank you very much. Ambassador, here is your T-shirt too. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you.